I think that probably everybody wishes they understood themselves better. Sometimes it's the simple stuff like why do I like taking walks to take in nature, or why is it so hard to look that other person in the eyes? Maybe it's a tad more complicated than that, though. Maybe you want to understand what makes you happy in life and what your purpose is here on Earth by extension. It's the same for me, too. I often feel like if I could better understand the person in the mirror, that maybe my life would be simpler to understand as well, but evaluating that sort of desire is why I'm writing the script in the first place. My obviously not real name is Wetspork, and I've been thinking recently about whether or not we're truly better off knowing more about ourselves, or if that sort of perception is something best left to ignorance for the sake of bliss. I say this pretty much every video, but I'm no expert. The best thing I can offer you is my nonsensical rambling in the hopes that maybe something between what I say and you matches. Before I really hop into it though, I'll ask you all a question wholly unrelated to the video, just to see what people think. Do you think that anyone can ever wholly and truthfully answer a complex hypothetical question, or can people only really truly understand said situation upon living it? Actually, now that I read this over, it kinda is related to the video, but I'm gonna let myself slide on this one. Alright, I'll get to the point by beginning with the question of why in the first place would we seek to know more about ourselves? This sounds rather simple, but understanding this part of us well is also pretty instrumental towards understanding why we may not want to know. In terms of daily occurrences, the bottom line is rather simple. Emotions are not only confusing, but nearly countless and swift in their presence. It wouldn't be a stretch to presume that knowing more about ourselves might, in turn, allow us to understand these emotions and, better yet, what to do with them. Like we said before, there's also something of which we would probably place a greater importance on when looking at the self besides just these daily things. These sort of things might include sources of happiness, strong desires, whatever that may include, sources of purpose, preferences and companionship, self-image, ambition, and whatever other properties play big roles in determining the direction of someone's life. We then might make the presumption once again that knowing these things would help us better steer the course of our lives in a direction of which we are certain we can be satisfied with. I mean, it seems rather elementary that possessing the knowledge of what makes you happy would probably be pretty helpful in how you go about seeking happiness in life. So then you ought to ask, what about understanding yourself could possibly be negative? I mean, even better, is it even possible to completely understand yourself, and is being in that state worthwhile? I know, that's a lot of questions there, but I'm sure that many of you watching so far could probably already curate a couple of reasons why knowing more about the self can be a downside, so for this first portion, allow me to hopefully validate your concerns. It's a pretty harsh reality, and the term ignorance is bliss has an incredibly heavy weight to its prevalence, particularly here. There are, almost undoubtedly, things about ourselves which we might never know and that we might be better off staying ignorant of. Say that we find out about ourselves while living in an illusion of happiness only possible because we're unaware we are deluding ourselves, that absolutely nothing can bring us true happiness. Or, maybe even worse, that the thing that would make you the most happy in life is something that will be completely unachievable and will forever just be out of your reach. Perhaps you find out that your true purpose in life, and no, I'm not trying to throw a bone to nihilism here, is absolutely nothing, and you must live with the full acknowledgement of that reality. I mean, we could make this almost as simple as you coming to the conclusion by a series of self-exploratory actions that you're simply a bad person, and despite whatever attempts you might have at self-workshopping, can't really escape from that reality. I think you can imagine how we might drone on and on with these sorts of conclusions, but the question in this game is, what does finding out about who you are determine the person you become? I've neglected to mention it until this point, but the only reason learning more about yourself has any purpose is in how it shapes the person who, upon gaining this knowledge, inevitably arises from the thought corpse of your original self. Okay, I'm willing to accept that maybe that image I made there was a tad grotesque, but I didn't want to make some weird caterpillar-butterfly parallel there, and if you knew the shit that went on in that cocoon, I think we'd both know that's not entirely accurate for this point anyways. Back to the point though, when you learn something new, particularly about yourself, you become not exactly an entirely new person, but perhaps ever so slightly change an aspect about yourself in the process of understanding it. So then it becomes a question of whether or not this new self is something you really want to be. And even further, if we assume all of the positives along the way, how far can we take self-omniscience? Self-omniscience definitely comes across as self-explanatory here, but I'll just make sure it's fleshed out. What I'm going to define self-omniscience here as is not the ability to know everything which pertains to you in the fullest, things like how you'll die or the like, but more so everything about your own personality. While through our examples earlier, we mentioned things such as knowing what makes you happy, and while that's sort of omniscience in its own regard, knowing the entirety is much more substantial than just a singular part of yourself. So, what would it be like to know everything about yourself, both good and bad? Specifically, what kind of person would that make you? Something like a monk? That would be super cool and all, but I'm probably going to have to gesture that at best it'd probably be incredibly confusing and tumultuous. The thing about humans is that they grow, and the people they encompass throughout their life are possibilities that come from whatever lies at the most innate part of themselves. When we learn something about ourselves, we branch into another part of what's possible for us, and from there, change as we learn about the person we've become. But with the whole self-omniscience thing and how the way we change is constant and never uniform, we end up in this vortex of endless understanding and therefore can never really come to a true understanding. Every time you learn something about yourself, you change, and if you're forever omniscient of yourself, then you will come to completely understand yourself and change as a person upon this understanding. However, upon changing as a person, you must become omniscient of the particular intricacies of this new person, and then, upon receiving and processing this information, change again. It's like this ruthless cycle where you get to know yourself better, become a different person because of it, learn more about the peculiarities of that person you've become, and then become some other one. At its simplest, it seems like this constant transitionary state where you don't really come to an end and could quite possibly even wrap around a personality's already transitioned through. Perhaps I'm taking this a little too seriously, but I can't really bring myself to believe that self-omniscience can be something so simple as knowing all about yourself and then persisting in some sort of stationary character. I mean, I'd be a being that knows everything about wet sport, but then I'd be a being that knows everything about the being which knows everything about wet sport, and so on. Either way, it seems like a bad rap. I'd love to give you a point to stop learning more about yourself, but I'm almost certain there's not a good metric for that. I'd also probably venture to say that while there are certainly people out there who have reached a point of self-understanding which gives them maximum returns of satisfaction, there are people who've probably gone too far as well. If anyone is trying to tell everyone that they completely understand themselves, I'd also probably like to say that their ability to delude themselves into believing so is just about as fine a way to live so long as it gets them what they want. There's likely a bell curve with an x-axis being self-understanding and the y-axis being satisfaction, and it's up to you to try and find that nice peak or if the journey is even worth the time. I'll end this by saying that while there's probably a fair line, and far one at that, I think that many of us, obviously including me, could do ourselves better by understanding why we do what we do. That's about all I have to say for now though, so tell me your thoughts and stay wet.